Impeach and remove. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. I'm joined today by John Bonifaz, president of Free Speech for People and the organization, head of the organization that is leading the campaign to have Donald Trump impeached again. That campaign has now reached over 200,000 signatures. So great to have you back on Lights On, John.
Jessica, thank you for having me. Great to be back with you.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. I'm so happy to have you here because, as you know, Lights On is action focused, and I want to know what we can do. We are barely into the third week of this presidency, and there is a blitzkrieg on the rule of law going on right now, an invasion of our federal agencies, a complete decimation of what we have come to know as the United States of America being attempted by Donald Trump and Elon Musk. We need to normalize the conversation about removing this illegal presidency. We could touch on, again, why he is illegal in a moment, but can you just start with me on that, why you came out of the gate when Donald Trump went illegally into that office with this impeachment campaign?
Yes, and I'll really start for why we have the impeachment clause in the Constitution. It's there because the framers of the Constitution recognized that we were not to have a nation governed by a monarch, a corrupt executive, that we were to have a nation where those in charge were accountable to the people and accountable to the rule of law. And so what the impeachment clause makes clear is that if you engage in high crimes and misdemeanors, if you engage in bribery, if you engage in treason or any of those matters, then you are subject to the impeachment process. And President of the United States, Donald Trump, came into office already having refused to divest from his business interests all around the world in violation of the emoluments clauses of the Constitution, already having engaged in corrupt and unlawful campaign practices, including campaign finance violations that led to him obtaining that office. And then, of course, within hours and days after taking that oath, he began to commit multiple other impeachable offenses, including the immediate abuse of the pardon power by pardoning January 6th insurrectionists for the crimes they had committed. 1,500 plus people pardoned, which was really engaged in protecting himself. This was designed to prevent any further kind of investigation or liability associated with his involvement in inciting that insurrection. But now we see, this rampant corruption, this trampling of the Constitution that's happened in the days since, and it calls out for invoking the impeachment clause and making clear that the rule of law applies and that this individual must be facing now the impeachment process.
100%, 100%. I believe, John, that everybody with a bully pulpit, I'm talking to you, Democrats, should be normalizing this conversation yesterday. We have a legal mechanism. You want to talk about a constitutional crisis? You want to talk about upholding the Constitution and the rule of law? Well, damn well start using it. You know how furious I am about their failure to uphold Section 3 of the 14th Amendment on January 6th. It was such an honor to have your expertise as a constitutional scholar, I will add, not just the president of this organization. You are a constitutional scholar, and you understood why our lawmakers had a mechanism, even in spite of the Trump v. Anderson ruling, to stop this illegal presidency before it started. But to now have the mechanism of impeachment and to think, oh, that's too out of the bounds. Oh, we don't have the numbers. Well, start frigging talking about it. Start talking about the numbers that you have. 200,000 Americans, even with, I will say, the limited attention that has been brought to this subject. I'll take credit for a few of those signatures.
Yes, absolutely. You should. Yes.
We've been promoting the heck out of it here on Lights On, but I really think we need to normalize this conversation. Of course, Representative Al Green already filed impeachment articles against Trump over his Gaza plan, the sick suggestion that the United States is going to be involved in the ethnic cleansing and displacement of Palestinians. And you have added that to your list. But there's really nothing stopping our elected leaders, the ones who purport to be pro-democracy, from getting involved in this conversation right now. Is there?
Absolutely. There is nothing to prevent them, and they absolutely have a duty to get involved. They each took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution when they came into this Congress, and they need to abide by that oath. I recognize that people will say, well, the votes are not there to pass an impeachment inquiry resolution or articles of impeachment. Honestly, that's not the question right now. The question is, we need to build this conversation and this debate as to whether or not we're going to allow this occupant of the Oval Office to continue to trample on the Constitution without any demand for accountability for the high crimes he continues to commit. It is a duty of anyone in Congress who dares to continue to believe in the Constitution and the rule of law and our democracy, is their duty to stand up and join Congressman Green in demanding that the impeachment process be used. Look, Jessica, we either have a Constitution or we do not. And that's really what's at stake right now. We either have Section 3 of the 14th Amendment or we don't. We either have an impeachment clause or we don't. We either have the rule of law or we don't. And that is the test that we're facing. We're about to face yet another moment here where it's going to be added to our site, I'm sure, in the coming days, where this defiance of court orders is going to continue to set us down this road of this constitutional crisis, where literally you have a judge in Rhode Island who is saying that the Trump administration is violating the court order issue to ensure that the funding that's been appropriated by Congress for the states, for Medicaid, for disaster relief, for so many things, that cannot be stopped unilaterally by this executive branch. They don't have the authority to appropriate money or decide whether money goes out. That's a decision solely for Congress. And so this federal judge has made clear you got to keep providing the funding that Congress has required. And yet, this White House is saying, we don't care. We're going to defy that court order. And that sets up the newest test as to whether or not we have an independent judiciary and whether or not we're going to start seeing contempt proceedings against Donald Trump and others in his administration for violating court orders, and whether we're going to see members of Congress stand up and invoke the impeachment clause over this yet again abuse of power that we're seeing from this White House.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And really, the damage is being done by the second. I had a conversation earlier talking about, we may not know just how much we can be hurt by, for instance, Elon Musk and his minions' invasion of Treasury for years. I mean, they could just be holding that information, our personal social security numbers, bank account numbers, vital personal information on private servers, and years later, when it is convenient for them for retributive or financial or whatever purposes they have, use that information against us. And every second that these people are allowed to remain in power illegally, more damage is being done to us. There is no time to waste here.
No time to waste, and no time for us to sit around and wait for these elected officials to think that, well, we got to figure out when the right timing is for this. The timing is now, because the abuses of power have already been happening and they're multiplying by the day. So I have no patience, honestly, with people who say we got to wait for the right moment for this, which really their suggestion is not do it at all or wait until 2027. And that is a danger to our republic, that they would hold on exercising their responsibility of invoking the impeachment clause until they see the absolute, ability to get the votes there. They need to start the process now, put the pressure on their colleagues to decide, are they going to stand on the rule of law, on the side of the rule of law and the Constitution, or are they going to stand with this lawless president who's trampling on the Constitution?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, we got to know each other discussing Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Like I mentioned, it was such an honor. Your clarity, your understanding of the straightforwardness of this issue was such a valuable asset to this conversation. And you and I talked about how in the first week after January 6th, after they ignored our calls in the 14th Now movement to reject his presidency, how he would in fact remain an illegitimate president without constitutional authority. There is the opportunity. Now, we have seen a flurry of lawsuits. They are all over the place. And to do credit where credit is due to the litigants, to the attorneys general like Chris Mays of Arizona, I could name many others, like the judges, many Republican appointed, who are saying, not on my watch, not in my court. But there haven't been any lawsuits yet based on Trump's his disqualification, the inception issue. I mean, I'm starting to talk about this, John, in terms of a disease. We can't just treat the symptoms. We have to treat the cause. And the cause here is a president who is there illegally from jump. There could be lawsuits and litigation right now based on his disqualification. Could there not?
Absolutely. And to remind your viewers, Jessica, Trump v. Anderson, the Supreme Court decision that decided the question brought by Colorado as to, the issue of invoking Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for eligibility to appear on state ballots. That decision solely was focused on whether states had the authority to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It was wrongly decided on that question, but the question the court decided did not go to the merits. They did not say there was an insurrection or was not an insurrection on January 6th. They did not rule on that. They did not rule on whether Donald Trump is disqualified. They solely focused on whether the states had the power to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. What that means is that the decision out of the Colorado Supreme Court, the decision out of the Maine Secretary of State's office, and the decision out of a court in Illinois in a case that we brought under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment challenging Trump's eligibility, that all three of those rulings found, with respect to the merits, that Donald Trump is disqualified, and all three of those rulings remained untouched with respect to the merits of that question. And therefore, Donald Trump remains disqualified to be president of the United States, regardless of that Trump v. Anderson ruling. He is an illegitimate president. He disqualified himself on January 6th by inciting the insurrection. And it makes clear, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that when you take an oath of office, as he did in January 2017, and then you turn around, you engage in insurrection, you're forever barred from holding future office again. The Supreme Court in Trump v. Anderson did not touch that issue. They did not overrule the merits-based decisions of the Colorado Supreme Court, the Maine Secretary of State, and the Illinois court. And therefore, the fact remains that he's disqualified. And what does that mean? It means that every single action he's taking is illegitimate. As an illegitimate president, he doesn't have the authority to do anything that he's doing under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So it does open the door very clearly to litigation challenging any one of his actions as being illegitimate under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
100%. And as you and I have clarified before on this show, there's so much misinformation out there. Any references to new legislation required by Congress, that was all dicta. It was not a mandate from that order. The fact of the matter is his current status is disqualified, and it would take an act of Congress to remove that disqualification. So that's where we stand, to be clear for the world. But John, getting back to your impeachment, actually, one of the things that you mentioned, as you mentioned to us a few minutes ago, that you listed is his pardon of the January 6th insurrectionists. People have come to me and said, Jessica, isn't this another example of violation of Section 3 for providing aid and comfort to insurrectionists by pardoning these individuals?
Well, I certainly think it is a abuse of power. There's no question about it. People talk about the pardon power and they have concerns about the sweeping extent of it. But there is no question here that a president that engages in this kind of set of pardons of the fellow insurrectionists that he incited to attack the Capitol to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power, that is an abuse of the pardon power and is an impeachable offense. But he's gone beyond that. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this idea that he can essentially take over the congressional role around appropriation money and decide whether money gets sent out or not is a total abuse of power. Senator Angus King said it was the greatest attack on the U.S. Congress in our history. Well, all he needed to do was finish that sentence and say, and that's why I'm now supporting the impeachment and removal of this lawless president. If you engage in that kind of attack on another branch of government, as he's done in that scenario, he's deserving of facing impeachment proceedings. But then he's about to attack the judicial branch with respect to their court orders that he decides.
And here he is. What did they do this weekend? They're suggesting, blatant abuse of power, suggesting the impeachment. They're not afraid of the impeachment conversation. Democrats are scared to death of it, but they're not afraid of it. They're suggesting the impeachment of judges to stop his authoritarian actions.
Exactly. So all of this is about ensuring that we are standing up for our republic and our Constitution at this critical moment in history. We cannot engage in, as Timothy Snyder, the historian who wrote On Tyranny, has said, in anticipatory obedience. Yes. That's what we're seeing with a lot of these characters, both on Capitol Hill and in the corporate sector and in the news media. This anticipatory obedience must stop. We have to challenge this tyrant wannabe and ensure that we maintain a democracy and a rule of law and our Constitution. And we have the tool for this. It's in the impeachment clause, Article 2, Section 4. It's there to be used, and this is the moment to use it.
100%. Motto for Lights On is another chapter out of Timothy Snyder's book. Stand out. Stand out.
Exactly right.
I took that as my call and my banner when I brought in Lights On Independent. You so beautifully exemplify that with the work that you and Free Speech for People do. And it says in that chapter, once you do it, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but once you do it, others follow. Somebody's got to start.
Absolutely.
So I was so grateful to start the protest of this presidency on January 3rd to 5th in DC. That protest activity has seen such a beautiful flourishing since then with the 50-51. There's another one planned for President's Day, kind of a not my President's Day protest. Other boycotts are coming up. What do you think? I mean, this really, we need to bring this conversation to the protests too,
Absolutely.
To really put the pressure on elected leaders, don't we? I mean, people should be showing up and speaking. If I will be speaking at these protests saying, impeach and remove this man now.
Absolutely. And we invite people to check out our site if they haven't yet, impeachtrumpagain.org. We've listed in detail all the various grounds for impeachment proceedings, and any one of those can be the source of remarks at events and rallies. And we do think this has to be taken to the streets. We need to be showing up in our public squares, in our town halls, and in the streets demanding that our elected officials do their job. They're there having taken that oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and they need to abide by that oath and follow that mandate. Hakeem Jeffries said the other day that he didn't know what kind of leverage he had. And he said, as you may have heard, he said the Republicans, they control the Congress, they control the White House, they control the courts. And so he says openly, I don't know what leverage he has. He has the Constitution. He has his own power there, not to mention that he's the senior member of the caucus, but he's also a member of Congress individually who can introduce articles of impeachment as a privilege resolution and force a floor vote and take stock of who's going to stand up for the Constitution now and who's not. Congressman Al Green is to be commended for being the first to step forward and make that demand, but he should not be alone. There are many other members of Congress who say they believe in the Constitution, who are now saying we're in this constitutional crisis. Go stand with Congressman Green and demand that the impeachment process be used.
100%. John, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Your clarity, your directness, your unwillingness to equivocate on these straightforward black and white constitutional issues is what we need right now. I'm so grateful to have you as a friend and a friend of the show.
Jessica, thank you. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for all that you're doing.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on Lights On. Please go to freespeechforpeople.org. The website is in the description below, and sign that petition. Add your name to that petition to have Donald Trump impeached. Also, please subscribe to Jessica Denson, the Jessica Denson YouTube channel where you're watching this right now. This show is the home for action. Lights On is about doing what is in our power, standing out, not letting democracy die on our watch. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, let your light shine.